Hello, good morning, good afternoon. I guess this is. It's a beautiful day in May, and we're in the middle of reading Love Comes Softly. I read to you last week 2 chapters, and I'm just going to refresh your memory. It's a Western that took place many, many decades ago, and Marty and her husband were traveling out west to build a homestead and everything like that, and he died. So she was left alone, and they had the funeral and everything. Neighbors that were around, who she didn't know, of course, came to help her, and one of them, named Clark, even proposed marriage to her. He said, "Listen, you need me, and I need a mother for my child." And she did agree, and they were married. So the chapter that we're on is called Marriage of Convenience. Marty awoke and looked out the window. She was surprised to see that it was already dusk outside. Vaguely aware someone stirring about in the kitchen, the smell of coffee and bacon made her realize that she was hungry. She heard Missy's chatter and remembered again why she was here. Without caring about anything, she arose, slipped on her shoes, and pushed her hair back from her face. She supposed that she was a mess, but what did it matter? She was surprised in the dim light to see her trunk sitting against the wall by a chest of drawers. Everything that she owned was in there. Even that thought failed to stir her. She opened the trunk, took out her brush, and ran it through her hair. Then she rummaged for a ribbon and tied her hair back from her face. At least she had made some improvement, she hoped. She smoothed her wrinkled dress and headed toward the smell of the coffee. Clark looked at her inquiringly as she entered the room, then motioned her to a chair at the table. "I'm not much of a cook," he said, "but it'd be fillin'." Marty sat down, and Clark came from the stove with a plate of pancakes and another side bacon. He set it down and went back for the steaming coffee. She felt a sense of embarrassment as she realized that he was doing what she should have been doing. Well, it'd be the last time. From now on, she'd carry her load. Clark sat down, and just as Marty was about to help herself to a pancake, she was stopped short by his voice. "Father, thank you for this food you provide by your goodness. Be with this your child as comforter in this hour, and bless this house and make it a home to each one as dwells here. Amen." Marty sat wide-eyed looking at this man before her, who spoke, eyes closed, to a God that she did not see nor know, and him not even a preacher. Of course, she had heard of people like that, who had a God outside a church, who had a religion apart from marrying and burying, but she'd never rubbed elbows, so to speak, with one before. Nor did she wish to now, if she stopped to think about it. So he had a God. What good did it do him? He'd still need someone to help with his Missy, hadn't he? His God didn't seem to do much about that. Oh well, what did she care? If she remembered right, people who had a God didn't seem to hold to drinking and beating their women. With a little luck, maybe she wouldn't have to put up with that anyway. A new wave of despair suddenly overwhelmed her. She knew nothing about this man. He could be anything. Maybe she should be glad that he was religious. It might save her a heap of trouble. "Ain't you hungry?" His words made her jump, and she realized that she had been sitting there letting her thoughts wander. "Oh, yeah," she stammered, and helped herself to the pancake that he was holding out to her. Missy ate with a hearty appetite, surprising in one so tiny, and chattered to her father at the same time. Marty thought that she picked out a word or two here and there, but she really didn't put her mind to understanding what the child was saying. After the meal, she heard herself volunteering to wash up the dishes, and Clark said, fine. He'd see to putting Missy to bed then. He showed her where things were, and then, picking up Missy, he began washing and readying her for bed. Marty set to work on the dishes. As she opened doors and drawers of another woman's cupboards, a strange sense of uneasiness settled on her. She must force herself to get over this feeling, she knew, for she had to take over this kitchen like it belonged to her. She couldn't restrain the slight shudder that ran through her, though. As she returned from emptying her dishwater on the rosebush by the door, Clark was pulling a chair up to the kitchen table. "She'd be asleep already," he said. Marty washed the dishpan on its peg and hung the towel on the rack to dry. What now, she wondered, but he took care of that for her. "The drawers in the chest all be emptied. I moved my things to the lean-to. You can unpack and make yourself more comfortable like. Feel free to be a-using anything in the house, and if there be anything that you be needin', make a list. I go to town most Saturdays for supplies, and I can be picking it up then. When you feel more yourself like, you might want to come along and do your own choosing. I think that you better get you some sleep. It's been a trying day. I know that it's going to take you some time to stop a hurting, for you to feel at home here. Well, try not to rush you." Then his gaze demanded that she listen and understand. "I married you only to have Missy a mama. I'd be much obliged if you allow her to call you so." It was an order. She could feel it as such, but her eyes held his steadily, and though she said nothing, her pride challenged him. Okay, she knew her place. He offered her a place of abode. She, in turn, was to care for his child. She'd not ask for charity. She'd earn her way. Missy's mama she'd be. She turned without a word and made her way to the bedroom. She closed the door behind her and stood for a few moments, leaning against it. When she felt more composed, she crossed quietly to where she could look down on the sleeping child. The lamp gave a soft glow, making the wee figure in the crib appear even smaller. "All right, Missy," Marty whispered. "Let us make a deal. You'll be a good kid, and I'll do my best to be a caring for you." She looked so tiny and helpless there, and Marty realized that here, at less than 2 years of age, was someone that life had already hurt. What deserving thing had this little one done to have the mother that she loved taken from her? Marty's own baby stirred slightly within her, and she placed a hand on the spot that was slowly swelling for the world to know that she was to be a mother. What if it were my little one, left without my care? The thought made near panic take hold of her. Again, she looked at the sleeping child, her brown curls framing her pixie face, and something stirred within her heart. It wasn't love that she felt, but it was a small step in the right direction. Marty was up the next morning as she heard the soft click of the door as Clark left the house to go to the barn. Quietly she dressed so as not to disturb Missy and left the room, determined to uphold her part of this convenience marriage of which she found herself a part. So she had a roof over her head, she'd earn it. She would be beholden to no man, particularly this cold individual whose name she now shared. She refused, even in her thoughts, to recognize him as her husband. And speaking of names, she cautioned herself, it wasn't going to be easy to remember that she was no longer Martha Claridge, but Martha Davis. Listlessly, she wondered if the law would object if she stubbornly clung to her real name. Surely she could be Martha, Lucinda, Claridge, Davis, without incriminating herself. Then with a shock, she realized that her baby would have the Davis name too. Oh no, she stopped short and put her hands to her face. Oh no, please, I want my baby to have Clem's name. But even as she fought it and let hot tears squeeze out between her fingers, she knew that she'd be the loser here as well. She was in fact married to this man, no matter how unwelcome the thought, and the child who would be born after the marriage would be in name his, even if it was Clem's. She felt a new reason to loathe him. "Well, anyway, I can name my baby Claridge if I want to," she declared hotly to herself. "He can't take that from me." She brushed her tears on her sleeve, set her chin stubbornly, and went on to the kitchen. The fire was already gone in the big black cook stove, and Marty was glad that she wouldn't have to struggle with that on top of her almost insurmountable task of just carrying on. She opened the cupboard doors and searched through tight-sealed cans until she found the coffee. She knew where the coffee pot was, she thought thankfully. Hadn't she washed it and put it away herself? There was fresh water in the bucket on a low table near the door, and she had the coffee on in very short order. "Well, that's the first step," she thought. "Now what?" She rummaged around some more and came up with sufficient ingredients to make a batch of pancakes. At least that she could do. She and Clem had almost lived on pancakes, the reason being that there had been little else provided for her to prepare. She wasn't going to find it an easy task to get proper meals, she realized. Her cooking had been very limited. Well, she'd learn. She was capable of learning, wasn't she? First, she'd have to discover where things were kept in this dad-blamed kitchen. Marty rarely used words that could be classed as profane, though she had heard plenty in her young lifetime. She sure felt like turning loose a torrent of them now, though. Instead, she chose one of her father's less offensive expressions, about the only one that she had been allowed to use. Dad blame. She exploded again. What's a body to do? Clark would expect more than just pancakes and coffee, she was sure. But what and from where was she to get it? There seemed to be no end of tins and containers in the cupboards, but they were all filled with ingredients, not something for breakfast. Chickens. She'd seen chickens, and where there were chickens, there should be eggs. She started to go out in search of some, through the kitchen door, through the shed that was the entry attached to the kitchen, when her eye caught sight of a strange contraption at the side of the shed. It looked like some kind of pulley arrangement, and following the rope down to the floor, she noticed a square cut in the floorboards, and one end had a handle attached. Cautiously she approached, wondering if she might be trespassing where she didn't belong. Slowly, she lifted the trap door by the handle. At first, she could see nothing. Then, as her eyes became more accustomed to the darkness, she picked out what appeared to be the top of a large wooden box. That must be what the pulley and rope were for. She reached for it and began to manipulate the ropes, noticing that the box appeared to be moving upward. It took more strength than she guessed it would, yet she found that she could handle it quite nicely. Slowly the box came into view. She could feel the coolness that accompanied it. At last the box was fully exposed, and she slipped the loop of rope over a hook that seemed to be for that purpose. The front of the box was fitted with a door, mostly comprised of mesh, and inside she could see several items of food. She opened the door and gasped at the abundance of good things. There were eggs in a basket, crocks of fresh cream, milk and butter, side bacon and ham. On the next shelf were some fresh vegetables and little jars containing preserves, and of all things, she decided after a quick sniff, fresh honey. Likely wild. What a find! She'd have no problem with breakfast now. She took out the side bacon and a few eggs. Then she chose some of the jam and was about to lower the box again when she remembered Missy. The child should have milk to drink as long as it was plentiful, and maybe Clark liked cream for his coffee. She didn't know. In fact, she didn't know much at all about the man. Carefully, she lowered the box again and replaced the trap door. Gathering up her find, she returned to the kitchen feeling much better about the prospect of putting breakfast on the table. The coffee was already boiling, and its fragrance reminded her how hungry she was. She took the dishes from the cupboard and set the table. She'd want the food hot when Clark came from chores, and she didn't know how long they took him in the mornings. Marty had just turned back to mixing her pancakes when she heard Missy. Best get her up and dress first, she decided, and left her ingredients on the cupboard. As she appeared at the bedroom door, Missy's bright smile faded away, and she looked at Marty with surprise, if not alarm. "Morning, Missy," Marty said, and lifted the child from the crib to place her on her own bed. "Now, I wonder where your clothes be," she spoke to the child. They were not in the large chest of drawers, for Marty had already opened each drawer when she unpacked her own things the night before. She looked around the room and spotted a small chest sitting beneath the room's one window. It was Missy's, all right, and Marty selected garments that she felt suitable for that day. She did have some sweet things. Her mama must have been a handy seamstress. Marty returned to the tiny one who sat wide-eyed, watching her every move. She laid the clothes on the bed and reached for Missy. But as the child realized that this stranger was about to dress her, she made a wild grab for her shoes and began screaming. Marty decided her shrieks would pale a ghost. "Now, Missy, stop that," she scolded, but by now the child was howling in either rage or fright. Marty knew not which. I want Pa," she sobbed. Marty conceded defeat. "Hush now, hush," she said, picking up the squirming little girl. Gathering the clothes against the heaving, howling child, she carried her to the kitchen, where she placed girl and belongings in a corner. Missy pulled her clothes to her possessively, still sobbing as she did so. Marty turned back to the pancakes just as the coffee sputtered and boiled over. She made a frantic grab for the pot, pulling it further to the back of the stove. She'd put in too much wood, she realized. The stove was practically jumping with the heat. She looked around for something that which to clean up the mess, and finding nothing that seemed suitable, went to her own room, where she pulled a well-worn garment from her drawer. The thing was not much more than a rag anyway, she decided, and back she went to the kitchen to mop up. Missy howled on. It was to this scene that Clark returned. He looked from the distraught Marty, who had by now added a burned finger to the rest of her miseries, to the screaming Missy in the corner, still clinging furiously to her clothes. Marty turned from the stove. She had done the best that she could for now. She tossed the soggy, smelly garment into the corner, and her eyes sparked as she nodded toward Missy. "She wouldn't let me dress her," she stormed. "She just set up a howling for her pa." She wasn't sure how she expected Clark to respond, but certainly not as he did. "I'm afeard the child's memory's pretty short," he said evenly, so calmly that Marty blinked. "She already be a-forgettin' what it's like to have a mama." He moved toward the cupboard, not even glancing Missy's way lest it encourage her to a fresh burst of tears. "She'll just have to learn that ye be her mama now, and that ye'll be boss. Now you take her on back to the bedroom and get her dressed, and I'll take over here." He indicated the somewhat messy kitchen and the partially prepared breakfast. Then he crossed and opened a window to let some of the heat from the roaring stove escape, and didn't look at either Marty or Missy again. Marty took a deep breath and stooped to scoop up Missy, who reacted immediately with screams like a wounded thing, kicking and lashing out as she was carried away. "Now look you," Marty said through clenched teeth. "Remember our bargain. I said be ye good, and I'd be your mama, and this ain't being good." But Missy wasn't listening. Marty deposited her on the bed and was shocked to hear Missy clearly and firmly state between screams, "I want mama." Oh, so she did remember. Marty's cold anger began to melt slowly. Maybe Missy felt about her the way she did about Clark, angry and frustrated. She didn't really blame her for crying and kicking. She'd be tempted to try it herself, had not life already taught her how senseless and futile it'd be. "Oh, Missy," she thought, "I know how you be feelin'. We'll have to become friends slow-like, but first," she winced, "first, I somehow has to get you dressed." She arranged the clothes in the order that she'd need them. There'd be no hands to sort them out as she struggled with Missy, she knew. Then she sat down and took the fighting child on her knee. Missy still threw a fit. No, it wasn't fear. Marty could sense that now. It was sheer anger on the child's part. "Now, Missy, you stop it!" Marty's voice was drowned out by the child's, and then Marty's hand smacked hard, twice, on the squirming bottom. Perhaps it was just the shock of it, or perhaps the child was aware enough to realize that she was mastered. At any rate, her eyes looked wide with wonder, and the screaming and squirming stopped. Missy still sobbed in noisy, gulping breaths, but she didn't resist again as Marty dressed her. When the battle was over, the child dressed, and Marty, exhausted and disheveled, the two eyed one another cautiously. "You poor mite," Marty whispered and pulled the little thing close. To her surprise, Missy did not resist, but cuddled close, allowing herself to be held and loved as they rocked gently back and forth. How long they sat thus, Marty didn't know, but gradually she realized that the child was no longer sobbing. Detecting the smell of frying bacon coming from the kitchen, she roused herself and used her comb, first on her own unruly hair, and then on the child's brown curls. She picked up Missy and returned to the kitchen, dipping a cloth in cool water to wash away the child's tears and also to cool her own face. Clark did not look up. There he was, doing what she should be doing again, Marty thought dejectedly. The pancakes were ready, the eggs fried, the bacon sizzling as he lifted it from the pan. The coffee steamed in their cups, and a small mug of milk sat at Missy's place. There was nothing left to do but to go sit down. He brought the bacon and sat down across from her. She wouldn't be caught this time. She remembered that he prayed before he ate, so she bowed her head and sat silently. She sat quietly waiting. Nothing happened. And then she heard faint stirrings, like the sound of pages being turned. She stole a quick glance upward and saw Clark sitting, Bible in hand, turning the pages to find the place that he wanted. She could feel the color rising slowly to her cheeks, but Clark did not look up. "We read today Psalms 121, he said, and began to read. "I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills, from whence cometh my help." Marty wished solemnly that her help would come from the hills. In fact, she'd take it from any direction. She brought her mind back to catch up to Clark's reading. She had already missed some by letting her mind wander. "The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall preserve thee from evil. He shall preserve thy soul. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in, from this time forth and even forevermore." Gently he laid the book aside on a small shelf close to the table, and then as he bowed his head and prayed, Marty was caught off guard again. "Dad burn him," she thought, but then her attention was taken by his words. "Our God, for this fine day and your blessings, we thank you." Blessings, thought Marty. Like a howling kid, spilled coffee and a burned finger. Blessings? But Clark went on. "Thank you, Lord, that the first hard mile with Missy be traveled, and help this one who has come to be her new mama." He never calls me by my name when he's talking to his God, thought Marty. Always this one. If his God is able to be answering his prayers, I sure hope he knows who he's talking about. I need all the help that I can get. Marty heard the rattle of dishes and realized that her mind had been wandering, and she had missed the rest of the prayer, including the amen. And still she sat, head bowed. She flushed again and lifted her head, but Clark was fixing Missy's pancake, so her embarrassment went unobserved. At first, breakfast was a quiet meal. Missy was too spent from her morning battle to be chattery, and Clark seemed preoccupied. Marty, too, sat with her own thoughts, and they were not at all pleasant ones. What after breakfast, she wondered. First, she'd have to do up the dishes, then properly clean the messy stove. Then what? She'd love a chance to wash up the few pitiful things that comprised her wardrobe. She'd also like to wash the blankets that she had and pack them away in her trunk. She'd need them again when she joined the wagon train going east. Her mind wandered on, making plans as to how she might repair the few dresses that she possessed if she could just find a little bit of cloth someplace. Clark said he went to town on Saturdays. Well, this was Wednesday. She'd have to take stock of the cupboards and try to have a list ready for him. She stole a glance at him and then quickly looked back at her plate. He certainly did not look like a happy man, she told herself. Brooding almost, one could call it. At any rate, deep-looking, as though trying to sort through something. Then Missy cut in with a contented sigh and a hearty, "All done, Pa." She pushed her plate forward. The face was transformed. "Well, that's Pa's big girl," he beamed, and the two shared some chattering that Marty made no effort to follow. Clark rose presently and refilled his coffee cup, offering her more too. Marty scolded herself for not noticing the empty cup first. Clark pushed back his plate and took a sip of the hot coffee. Then he looked evenly across at her. She met his gaze, though she found it difficult to do so. "Suppose you be at a loss, not knowing where to find things and all. I see you found the coal pit. Good. There be also a root cellar out back. Most of the garden vegetables are already there. Only a few things still be out in the garden. A shelf with cannons there too, but you need a light along to do your choosing. It be dark in there. There's also a smokehouse out by the root cellar. Not too much in it right now. We plan on doing our fall killing and curing next week. 2 of the neighbors and me works together. There be chickens for eggs and for eating. We try not to get the flock down too low, but there's plenty to spare right now. There won't be fresh meat until it turns colder, except for a bit of the pork. When the cold weather comes, we try and get some wild game. It keeps then. Sometimes we kill us a steer if we think we be a-needin' it. There be fish in the crick, too. When the work's caught up, I sometimes try my hand at loafing and fishing. We're not bad off, really." It was not a boast, simply a statement. "We have us real good land, and the Lord be blessing it. We've had good crops for the last 4 seasons. The herd has built up too, and the hogs and chickens are plentiful enough. All the garden truck that we can use can be growed right outside the house, and there's lots of grains in the bins for seeding. We have some cash, not much, but enough, and if we do be needing more, we can always sell us a hog. We're better off than a lot of folks, but the neighbors round about here are making good too. Seems as how our move to the west been a good one. Got me some cuttings a few years back from a man over across the crick, and in a couple of years, if all goes well, we should have us some fruit on 'em. The apples might even be setting next year, he tells me. I'm a-telling you this so you be knowing the lay of the land, so to speak. You don't need to apologize for asking what you be needing, both for yourself and for Missy. We never been fancy, but we try and be proper." He pushed back from the table after his long speech and stood silently for a moment, as if sorting out in his thinking if there was anything else that he should tell her. "We has a couple of good milk cows a milking at present, and another due with an off-season calf, so we have all the milk and butter we be needing. There's a good team of horses and a riding horse too, if and ever you want to pay a visit to a neighbor's. Ma Graham be the closest, and she's about as good company as anybody be a-wanting. I think you'll find her to your liking, even if she be a lot older than you. Most of my field work is done for the fall, but I do have me a little break-in I aim to do yet, if in winter holds off a while. First, though, I plan to spend a few days helping one of the neighbors who ain't through yet. He got him a slow start. Plan to go over there today, Jed Larson, and give him a hand. I'll be asked to stay to dinner with him, so won't be home till chore time. You can make yourself to home, and you and Missy get to know one another like, and maybe we won't have any more of those early morning fusses. He turned to Missy then and swung her up easily into his arms. You want to come with Pa to get old Dan and Charlie? She assented loudly, and the two set off for the barn. Marty stirred herself. No more early morning fusses. That was his only reference to the incident. He hadn't seemed to pay much heed at the time, but she reflected maybe it had bothered him more than he let on. She began to clear the table. Clark had said so much that it seemed difficult to sort out at the one time. She'd shelve it for now and draw on it later as she had need. She began to make plans for her day. She'd scout around and find a tub to heat water and then wash clothes and blankets, as she hoped she could. Maybe she'd be able to find a needle and thread and do the much-needed repair work as well. By the time she'd started on the dishes, Clark was back to deposit Missy, working to detach her clinging arms. Missy had by now become used to going everywhere with her pa, and it wasn't going to be easy for the first while to make her understand that things would be different now. After Clark had left and Missy had finally ceased her crying, Marty put away the last of the dishes and set to work cleaning the stove. That done, she swept up the floor and felt ready to turn to her own plans for the day. She'd never had much practice at keeping a real house, but she was determined that she would do a good job of it. Clark was never going to be embarrassed about the home that he lived in as long as she was earning her way. As soon as she had her own things in order, she'd turn her attention to the house, which had been a bachelor's quarters for too long. Even though Clark had been better than most in keeping things up, still it wasn't as a woman would have it. Just give her a few days, she'd have things in order. So that's a little bit more about Clark and Marty and Missy, and we'll find out a little bit more next week. Have a great day.